Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
These are great lectures. I read the other one, and they're essentially exactly as I expected. They're thoughtful, wise, comprehensive, and I agree with a very large part of what he has to say. So what do? I mean, that's sort of you could say that and shut up, but maybe that's not. One day I want to do that. Actually, it seems like you're forced into this corner of having to actually give comments and somehow manage to disagree, and sometimes that's difficult. So I feel trapped, but I'll try. So what I decided to do is just remove the judicious part of Raghu. Just go take the same material, but kind of dial it up, give a kind of a cartoon guide to this material. Maybe once the judicious is taken out, you'll have a more clearer sense of, I think, what the underlying, maybe more dire message that I think I read in these slides. So that's and maybe at the end I'll say something that will maybe provoke some disagreement from Raghu and from many others, and then we'll have a conversation as well. So I think the starting point is the past, as always, and I think the mystery, I've said this many times, I don't know why India is growing. I know all the reasons why it shouldn't grow. I've written about many of the reasons it shouldn't grow. The stalled liberalization that it stalled a long time ago. It's not now. It's stalled a long time ago. If you look at average tariff rates, they kind of plateaued in 2002 and have not really changed. The broken banking sector, that I think is more recent. It got more and more broken after the 2009 spending boom. The archaic labor laws, the land acquisition that Raghu talked about, the education sector, which I have written about, the healthcare, and more. I mean, so it's very easy to come up with all the reasons India shouldn't grow. But I think the interesting question, and that helps us in the diagnosis of what things might have gone wrong, is to recognize that it was growing, and that there is something. It was doing something. Something was going right. This is not, I know that the growth numbers are extremely controversial now. I suspect Arvind was not entirely coy about it. So but here's a number that you should see as an independent check on. This is poverty. And you can see that basically poverty is flat or slowly falling till 1990, and then completely crashes, goes from something like 40% to something like 15%, and that's an enormous change, and a change that happens wouldn't have happened without growth, especially since all the other evidence we know that inequality went up a lot. So if inequality goes up a lot and the economy doesn't grow, you don't have a reduction in poverty. So I think there is very clear. This is independent check in a sense on that. The GDP data, you believe or not, this is I think something that did happen. I'll come back to that. So I think why did it work? Well, I think one thing is that I think just the country of India size, if we look at the world tech sector, you see how many of the top people in the world tech sector are actually people who are educated in the Indian education sector. Just take 1.3 billion people, take the 0.001% of that with a decent education sector for the top, and it's very hard to go wrong with that. So I think there's lots of talent, a very old and very sophisticated business community, long history, at least 2,000 years of international trade. I do think that those things count. There's experience, there is kind of implicit knowledge. I think one of the things that was very critical is just how misallocated the economy was. Now, why do I say that? Well, misallocation in a sense is an opportunity for growth. You've accumulated a bunch of resources, you put it all in the wrong places. You have a bunch of very, very talented people. They're all working as POs in banks. But in fact, they are actually very talented people. Why are they working there? Those are the best jobs under central planning. You open up the economy, you suddenly see that there is a bunch of opportunities to be taken. And I think that's a very important part of what happened, was that there was massive gains from reallocation, talent moved, contract labor came in, bunch of stuff happened. And the last thing I want to say, which is less emphasized, is that the breakdown of the joint family was key to the real estate boom. And the real estate boom is key to the transmission of growth to rural areas. One thing that people are puzzled by is UP and Bihar are not growing, all right, we're not growing for a long time. Why is poverty falling there? Well, one reason is that they are the major exporters of labor to the rest of the country. And in the rest of the country, the real estate boom was where they were working. The real estate boom plus the brick kilns, this is a huge part of how the urban prosperity gets transmitted to rural areas. I want to emphasize that because I think that's key to something that we should start worrying about, because that channel, I will claim, is broken right now. I think that in addition, and so that these are what I would call the structural drivers, the good things, which were to some extent are still there. Some of them less so, obviously, misallocation less so, but still I think there. What was also true is that I think these are things that helped for a while and can help in the short run. A poorly run financial sector is sort of a good gamble for, if you're an enterprising businessman with good contacts and an ability to parlay your way into a big loan, it's not a bad thing. I mean, you have see the current story of the Ruyas having defaulted on any amount of loan on SR, now claiming that they should have the right to buy it back. After they've borrowed on SR, defaulted on very, very large amounts of money, their claim is we should have the right to buy it back because we were running better than anybody else. So, there's a certain amount of, if you are shameless enough and, just immense kutzpah. So if you're shameless enough and brave enough, you can make money. And the banking sector, when it's incompetent, it actually gives you a one-way gamble. You can always default. You have any number of layers in the corporate hierarchy of firms. Firms are held through many holding companies, so you can never lose your assets. You lose what you pledge, but that's very small, and you walk away from it. That's what the Ruyas are doing right now. So it's a very clear one-way gamble, and people took a lot of these one-way gambles. A lot of money was therefore invested, especially in things like real estate. Now, for the macroeconomy, these one-way gambles are not one-way gambles. They're two-way gambles because, of course, it's somebody's money. That person is losing it. It's often the bank's money. The bank's money is actually the depositor's money. The depositor's money, the government basically is implicitly guaranteeing. So that is not a one-way gamble. The economy is now facing the fact that it gave a lot of one-way gambles to people, but they came back to them. Then there is, in addition, this was made worse by the fact that there was a lot of opportunities created in mining, in real estate, in some other sort of more land-based businesses where there was just windfalls available. There was just lots of windfalls available. If you knew the right people, you could get large windfalls. And then I think the government, basically, this is also important, the government ran, especially if you think of UPA2, UPA2 ran entirely, its fisc ran on inflation. The government was borrowing very large amounts every year, and the debt to GDP ratio was falling every year. It was like completely, and the only way that happens is your real interest rates are very, very low. Why is it they're very, very low? Because the inflation is very high. So that was how the economy ran, and the reason why that worked was that the financial sector is closed, and so you can't export your savings, so your savings are trapped, and the government basically borrowed them at very low interest rates. This was the architecture of how UPA economy and NDA1, all of them ran more or less on the same architecture. So now this architecture started to unravel, and the facts are that here's a fact that I want to talk about growth, but I want to tell you something that is striking. we just have the analysis of the last available round of the NSS. The NSS is the National Sample Survey. 2017-18 NSS is people on average are poorer than they were in 2014-15. Not growth has slowed. They are poorer. Okay, this is a fact that, if you take away a fact from what I have to say, this is a fact to take away. They are now strictly poorer. Maybe these are within measures of, there's some error. I mean, these are very large samples, so, 200,000 people, so you shouldn't take much, don't take too much faith in the errors. There's some non-sampling errors, so maybe there's something slightly wrong, but these numbers this is something that hasn't happened for many years. Over a 4-year period, average consumption going down hasn't happened for many years. And this is after correcting for inflation. Okay, so this is for many years, meaning I'm guessing in the 70s. So this is a fact that should be extremely serious. Seen as extremely serious. Investment has totally collapsed. Private investment has collapsed by a factor of, I think, by 75% from its peak. Exports are not growing, have not been growing for a long time. Public borrowing, as Raghu, I think, points out, properly added up is 9-10% of GDP. I think this is a crisis. I think we can not call it a crisis if we want. We can say that we could be in a crisis, but I think we are in a crisis. I think.
You skipped a slide.
Oops, and I should not have, because why did this happen? So I don't have a full diagnosis, lots of things, but I'll say a couple of things. One is, I think that something interesting was happening in the last years of UPA2. What happened was that there was rising anger against crony capitalism, appropriately. The way they reacted to it was also appropriate, in the sense that they tried to create a set of institutions. For example, the National Green Tribunal and the Land Acquisition Act, plus putting more and more kind of sort of heft behind the Right to Information Act. These are all things that were very important to do at that time, because the idea was that for the long run, it's important that the state has credibility. And to have credibility, it's important that land acquisition becomes more transparent, that the environmental depredations that were happening get checked, etc. So those were all, I think, useful things to do. However, they happened late in UPA2. That's not and first thing that such institutions do is that they see their writ as seeing there's so many problems, let's do something. So they started doing something. The first thing that does is it paralyzes. Why does it paralyze? Because, at that point, the institutions need judgment. They need to learn what to do and what not to do. They did a bunch of stuff. This is how all institutions evolve. But in this very early in their life, they led to a bunch of decisions that could not easily be moved, and that led to a situation where there was a sense of paralysis. I do think that this is something that was actually necessary. It didn't help the UPA. I think it would have helped in the long run. But I think the reaction of the new government was that this is a sign that we have given away too much power. So what they started to do was to re-centralize all decisions. You've given away too much power, let's now take it back. How do we take it back? The institutions exist. So instead we put people at the top who don't have any real decision authority. We punish people who stick out their neck, and we put the PMO, the Prime Minister's office, in every decision. That's how you do it. You don't actually destroy the institution. You kind of just take away their writ, but that means we are worse than not having the institution. Why? Because now there is a layer at which you can go. You have to go. You have to get approval, but you can't get that approval because these people are now, nobody wants to stick out their neck. They say, okay, wait, we'll check with PMO. PMO is busy, so nothing happened. So we went from having a situation with no institutions to having potentially better institutions which have their own challenges to a situation where the institutions are now an extra level of bureaucratic check on the system, and the system. So this, I think, things basically became, institutions went from hyperactive to zombies. And zombies are the worst because now you're completely frozen in a sense. They're not even doing anything particularly. And I think this is part of the reason why investment has plunged. I talk to my friends who are businessmen. They say that it's impossible to invest. You don't know who's going to call you up and say that that's not the right thing to do. Okay. I think in addition, there is a demand problem. And I think this is a combination of demonetization, which had a huge effect on demand and had multiplier, GST implementation. I also think the monetary policy regime that basically tries to pin down inflation pretty low. This creates two things. One, it removes that UPA spigot, which was funding the economy. You don't have the spigot anymore. That was so there is some crowd out as a result. Basically, real interest rates go up as a result of that. And the second thing, so the government can't be financed through inflation. And second, it means that the government basically sat down and decided that agricultural prices can't keep going up because otherwise inflation would go up. So what they did was the agricultural support prices, which is what essentially decides how much rice and wheat will be priced in the market, got flattened. And you can see the terms of trade moving sharply against agriculture in this period. That's a result of a policy choice. It's not an accident. It's a policy choice that the government made. And that, again, creates a demand deficit, adds to a demand deficit among the low-income population. So these are, and the financial crisis, which I think is both, I think the real estate sector overexpanded, and so there was a crisis coming. That crisis fed into the banking sector and the non-banking financial sector. The non-banking financial sector then started collapsing and stopped lending, which fed the real estate sector's credit then dropped. The ILFS crisis is playing both sides of that. The ILFS was both one of the beneficiaries of the lending, and when it also overbuilt, and when it started collapsing, the banks started collapsing. So it's a two-way relationship, and this is I think an important mechanism. Now that the real estate sector is frozen, you can see why rural consumption is going to not grow, because that's a major channel. And I think this is something to be worried about, even for a government that is not particularly sensitive, doesn't see it's particularly sensitive to this. I think they should worry about it. Okay, last couple of slides. I think the reaction to sharp growth slowdowns in the world has often been disastrous. This is what happened in the US in the mid-70s, in Latin America in the early 80s, in Japan in the early 90s. Each case, they failed to manage it. What they did was the reason is expectations are high. You expect growth should continue, and that makes it very hard to sell the message that we should just tighten our belt on all sides. You don't do that. As a result, what you do is you flail around. You cut taxes on the rich. You make some public investment. Japan had all these wonderful bridges to nowhere, literally. So you make some public investments that don't make any sense. In the end. This is one of the things that we have a new book coming out. One we describe this in some detail. That all it does is really hurt the income distribution and make the government debt explode, often ending up in a full-blown meltdown. This is what happened in Latin America. And so I think we seem to be. You check off those things. You'll see we've just cut the taxes. We're considering some public investments. We're doing well on this time-honored path to disaster. What's the alternative? Well, I think become more proactive. I think in the short run, I think it's very important to do something about demand, because I think demand is a big problem. And to do that, I can say lots of the details. I'm also out of time. The main thing is that I think we should, in the short run, forget about monetary policy. And maybe this is where Raghu will disagree with me. I think the monetary policy, quantitative easing is what the US called it, because they didn't want to call it printing money. But I think having a more lax monetary policy is going to be important for this moment. And not interest rate cuts. We're trying interest rate cuts. No evidence that in a crisis, interest rate cuts do anything. They do something when the economy is doing okay, and when it's stopped growing, which may very well, it doesn't really do anything. Let the rupee slide, and since it's an NDA government, we can pray. I think if the short run moves us, if the short run moves by us some breathing room, let's be grateful and act fast. And I think the very important thing to do, and this is where I totally agree with Raghu, is to strengthen the institutions. And to do that, I think one of the things we have to do is just not, I think it's very important to not act on people who look like they were contradicting the government's rate. I think the Caesar's wife principle applies extremely strongly here. The government cannot be seen, even if it's true that this guy was doing something bad. It's very important that you demonstrate that they were actually doing something bad before you act, and rather than act before you demonstrate. And then you put the people in jail and then see if you can find something. That's the wrong way to go. And I think that undermines confidence in the government. And likewise, give media the chance to pursue transparency. I think this is in the government's interest. I think the government needs to do this too, if it wants to build the credibility of its institutions, and accepting criticism as well. And I think the second thing that needs to be done in the very short run, immediately, and I don't want to talk about the longer run because I don't have any time and I don't have much to say either, is that there should be, I think one thing we don't have is a landing plan for the economy. How do you go from 9-10% public debt and an economy that's frozen to some place where the economy lands without making up numbers over the growth rate? The growth will be 8% from next year onwards, etc. Let's not make up those numbers. Let's give a landing path that's realistic and then stick to that plan without having to be creative.